You step outside in summer, and within a few weeks, your skin darkens. Not because you decided to, not because anything changed inside you, just sunlight landing on your skin and your body quietly responding to it, the way it has for millions of years. Step back inside for a winter, and it slowly fades. Your body is doing something automatic, something ancient. But the real reason human skin color exists at all, and why it changed so dramatically across different populations, is far stranger than a suntan. Skin color is one of the most visible differences between people on the planet. It has shaped history, identity, politics, and entire social systems that are still running today. But biologically, it is one of the most recently evolved and rapidly shifting traits the human body has. Some of the genetic changes responsible for lighter skin in certain populations spread through those populations only in the last 10,000 years, possibly less. In evolutionary terms, that is almost nothing. You are watching evolution happen, stretched across recent history. So where did it start, and why did it change? Your skin contains specialized cells called melanocytes. They produce a dark pigment called melanin. More melanin means darker skin. Less melanin means lighter skin. Melanin also comes in two forms. Eumelanin produces brown and black tones. Pheomelanin produces red and yellow tones. The ratio between them and the total amount produced creates the full spectrum of human skin color you see across the world. That part is biology. What is not obvious is why different populations landed so far apart on that spectrum, and the answer has almost nothing to do with what most people assumed for most of history. It has to do with sunlight. Not because sunlight affects how you look, but because sunlight does two completely opposite things to your body at the same time, and your skin evolved to balance them. Here is the first thing. UV radiation from the sun breaks down folate in your body. Folate, also called folic acid, is a B vitamin your body cannot store in large amounts and cannot produce on its own. And it is not optional. Without enough folate, neural tube defects become far more likely during early pregnancy. Developing fetuses without sufficient folate face serious risks to their brain and spinal cord formation. UV radiation is not just a cause of sunburn. It is a threat to reproduction itself. Dark skin, loaded with melanin, absorbs and scatters that UV radiation before it can penetrate far enough to destroy folate in the bloodstream. It is a biological shield built for high UV environments. Researcher Nina Jablonski at Penn State University has spent decades working on exactly this question. Her work, done alongside geographer George Chaplin, produced one of the clearest maps ever assembled linking human skin color to UV radiation intensity across the globe. The correlation is striking. Populations that evolved closest to the equator, where UV radiation is intense year-round, consistently have the deepest pigmentation. Move away from the equator, and skin gets progressively lighter, almost without exception. The pattern holds across every continent, every population, every geography. Jablonski's data showed that folate protection, not heat tolerance, not any other environmental factor, tracks most tightly with pigmentation. Melanin is not decoration, it is infrastructure. So that explains dark skin near the equator. It still does not explain why skin ever got lighter. Here's the second thing sunlight does. UV radiation triggers the production of vitamin D in your skin. Vitamin D is not really a vitamin in the traditional sense. It functions closer to a hormone, one your body cannot get in sufficient quantities from food alone in most environments. You need UV light on your skin to make it. And without enough vitamin D, the consequences are serious. Bones weaken and deform. Immune function deteriorates. Reproductive health declines. Children born to severely deficient mothers face higher risks of developmental complications. Vitamin D deficiency can be as lethal as any predator. It just works more slowly. Now here is the problem. Dark skin, which does such a good job blocking UV radiation to protect folate, also blocks the same UV your body needs to synthesize vitamin D. Near the equator, that is not a problem. UV radiation is so intense that even deeply pigmented skin absorbs enough to produce adequate vitamin D year-round. But move far enough north or south, and the sun angle flattens. UV levels fall dramatically, especially in winter. And now dark skin becomes a liability. It is still blocking UV, but there is barely any UV to block, and what little exists, your body desperately needs for vitamin D synthesis. This is the evolutionary trap your ancestors navigated without knowing it. Darker skin protects folate near the equator, but prevents vitamin D production far from it. Lighter skin solves the vitamin D problem in low UV environments, but sacrifices folate protection. Natural selection, working invisibly across many generations, pushed different populations toward the balance that worked for where they actually lived. That is the core mechanism. But the genetic details of how it happened are where things get genuinely strange. There is no single skin color gene. There are dozens. More than 150 genetic variants have been identified so far that influence pigmentation in humans, and researchers keep finding more. But a handful had outsized effects on specific populations. In people of European descent, a variant in a gene called SLC24A5 accounts for a significant portion of the pigmentation difference between Europeans and Africans. When researchers first identified this variant, they expected to find it had been slowly spreading through European populations for hundreds of thousands of years. Europeans had been living in Europe for a long time. The gene should be ancient. But the genetic data told a completely different story. The spread of this specific variant is surprisingly recent. Genetic studies, including research led by Ian Matheson at the University of Pennsylvania examining ancient DNA recovered from archaeological sites across Europe, found that lighter skin variants were not widespread among early European hunter-gatherers. Ancient DNA analysis paints a picture of a continent where people ranged across a much wider spectrum of pigmentation than modern Europeans do. The lighter skin variants that dominate European populations today appear to have spread rapidly and risen to high frequency only within roughly the last 8 to 10,000 years. And some evidence pushes that window even later. Agriculture likely played a major role in accelerating the shift. Hunter-gatherers eating fish, fatty meats, and organ meats had ready dietary sources of vitamin D that early farmers, subsisting heavily on grain, simply did not. As populations transitioned to farming and dietary vitamin D dropped, the selection pressure for skin that could synthesize more from sunlight may have intensified significantly. Light skin did not just drift into European populations by chance. It was pushed there by the collapse of a dietary safety net. That alone should make you pause. The skin tone most associated with Northern Europeans in the modern world is not some ancient heritage stretching back to the origins of the species. By evolutionary standards, it is almost brand new. And it gets stranger still. East Asians also have relatively lighter skin compared to equatorial populations, but the genetic variants responsible are almost entirely different from the European ones. The two lineages solve the same problem independently, through completely different molecular pathways. Biologists call this convergent evolution. Two separate groups facing the same environmental pressure, arriving at the same biological solution through entirely different genetic routes. This means lighter skin was not inherited from one ancient common ancestor and passed forward intact. It evolved separately, multiple times in multiple places across the span of human prehistory. The same solution, reinvented from scratch more than once. Here is the piece of this story that almost nobody tells, and which might be the most counterintuitive part of all. Your earliest hominin ancestors, millions of years ago, before modern humans existed, almost certainly had pale skin under their fur. Chimpanzees and gorillas, our closest living relatives, have light skin concealed beneath dark hair. That pale skin is shielded from UV radiation by the hair covering it, so the body has no evolutionary reason to darken it. As early humans gradually lost their body hair over the course of roughly 2 million years of evolution, most likely because bipedal long-distance running generated enormous body heat that needed to be shed through sweat rather than panting, that exposed pale skin suddenly found itself under intense equatorial sunlight. The consequences would have been severe: folate destruction, reproductive failure, intense natural selection to darken. The original shift, millions of years ago, was from light to dark. Humans lost their fur. Their skin darkened rapidly in evolutionary terms. They thrived near the equator. And then, as populations began moving into lower UV environments over tens of thousands of years, selection in some lineages slowly reversed course and pushed pigmentation lighter again. The story runs in both directions across deep time. First the fur went, then the darkness came, then some of the darkness left. There is one exception that makes the underlying mechanism undeniably clear. Indigenous peoples of the Arctic, including the Inuit, live at some of the highest latitudes on Earth, where UV levels are extremely low for much of the year. By the logic of vitamin D synthesis, you would expect them to have very light skin. They do not. They have relatively darker pigmentation compared to other high-latitude populations, and researchers puzzled over this for years. The answer turned out to be diet. Traditional Arctic diets are exceptionally rich in vitamin D from marine mammals, fish oils, and organ meats. Their bodies get vitamin D from what they eat, rather than from UV exposure. The selection pressure for lighter skin in low UV environments exists because of the need for vitamin D. Remove that need through diet, and the pressure disappears. The skin stays darker. The biology tracks the actual underlying need, not the latitude. It is one of the most elegant natural experiments in all of human evolution. Now step back and look at all of this together. If skin color evolved this recently, this dynamically, in response to UV environments with remarkable precision across different populations, and if it evolved independently multiple times through different genes, what does that say about the weight we have placed on it? Skin color is real. The variation is real. The biology is real. But the variation is also shallow in the most literal sense. Melanin lives in the outermost layer of your skin. It tells you where your ancestors lived and what UV environment shaped them over recent evolutionary time. It is, in biological terms, no different in principle from the adaptations that shaped nose width in humid versus dry climates, or the limb proportions that shift systematically across cold and hot environments. It is geography written on skin, nothing more. And yet, this particular surface trait, this UV regulation mechanism assembled from dozens of recently evolved genetic variants, became the axis around which enormous amounts of human history organized itself. Classifications were built on it. Hierarchies were imposed through it. Violence was justified by it for centuries. None of that has any grounding in the actual biology. The biology is about sunlight, about folate, about vitamin D, about the angle of the sun at different latitudes. Everything built on top of that was constructed by people, from something evolution assembled for entirely unrelated reasons. Ancient DNA research keeps reshaping the timeline. New studies from sites across Europe, Asia, and Africa keep revealing more variants, more complexity, more evidence that pigmentation is a mosaic assembled from dozens of overlapping pressures across time, rather than a simple inherited characteristic passed unchanged through the generations. So here is the full picture. Your skin, right now, wherever you fall on the spectrum, is the result of a negotiation between UV radiation and your ancestors' latitude. It is folate protection balanced against vitamin D production, refined across millions of years of movement, migration, and changing diets. It shifted from light to dark when body hair disappeared. It shifted in different directions in different populations over the last 50,000 years. It is still technically shifting now, though modern life has largely decoupled us from the selection pressures that drove it. You step outside this summer and your skin darkens. It is doing the same thing it has always done, long before any human being was around to notice it. Responding to the sun, reading the environment, balancing two competing needs the only way it knows how. That same quiet response, running automatically for millions of years, scattered human beings across every latitude on Earth and dressed them differently for every climate they found. Not to divide them, not to rank them, just to keep them alive long enough to have children, in whatever corner of the planet they happened to be standing.